Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom, and yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to ensure that we've got time to properly get the legislation through that pertains to that wonderful part of the United Kingdom. Yes, we must make absolutely certain that there is sufficient time, that it's not dropped or waited, that they have to wait until after the next general election for that properly to be dealt with. I mean, there are lots of other reasons. We've all got staff that are working here as well. They need to have proper notice as to all the sorts of plans that they need to make as to when we when we have the prorogation and they leave. I mean, a lot of people outside don't realise that for those of us fighting elections, when prorogation comes and this place closes, we're fairly well banned from the parliamentary estate. I made the grave error once, Madam Deputy Speaker, of having left something in my office, and I had to arrange to come during an election. In order to come to my office, I was met by a security clerk who actually walked with me to my office, let me into my room because they were all locked, and then stood over me watching what I was taking out of the drawers. I mean, people don't appreciate all of this. So having an extra 3 days, I can see the opposition chief whip laughing, but it was proper stuff that I'd left behind during just before, yes, addresses, telephone numbers, who knows? Anyway, so there is actually merit in people, particularly those who got elected in 2017. I don't think they quite understand what is about to befall them when this place actually closes down. And so I think it is appropriate to have that lead in. And I'm still persuaded by the 12th, Madam Deputy Speaker, because, as I say, a Thursday is a traditional day. I think it was probably the old market day as to why a Thursday was chosen. I know lots of people have it on a weekend. And clearly, if we had it on a Sunday, I'm a member of the Council of Europe. Sunday is a day where a lot of Council of Europe countries have general elections. But I can understand from a religious point of view why that may not be totally appropriate. I'm even persuaded, Madam Deputy Speaker, of having early voting, so the 9th or the 12th wouldn't be as important for those who all of a sudden are told by their works that they have to be away, and they don't know until like a day before that they have to be away from their town, and they may be away 2 or 3 days. Too late to get a postal vote, too late to get a proxy vote. And so therefore I rather like the idea of being able to turn up to the town hall with proofs of identity, yes, a photo ID to prove that you are who you are, that you live where you live, and then being able to cast your vote in the town hall, which then doesn't mean that the 9th or the 12th, if we had this in play now, would be so important. So I do hope that whoever wins the next general election, that we can have a proper, considered debate about elections and the way that they're held. We've heard all sorts of ideas about schools shouldn't be used, and I fully appreciate that. Yes, of course, I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. When he used the word proper, does the honourable gentleman agree with me, as we head into this general election, of course it's absolutely vital we have the firmest possible debates that we need to have, but it needs to be with civility and respect. In 2017, I had the worst campaign against me by my Labour opponent, and on election night, you have a Labour group assistant on Medway Council say to an elected Member of Parliament who's giving his acceptance speech, "Fuck off back to country X." My country is this great country, and Gillingham is my hometown. So do I fuck off back to Gillingham? That can't have been...
Order. Order. The honourable gentleman must resume his seat. This is about the date of the election. It's not about conduct of the election. It's about the date of the election. Nigel Evans.
Well, friend has made a very powerful point. I think the reality, whether it's the 9th or the 12th, we all know it's going to be a very lively, vigorous campaign, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think we need to show respect whenever that date comes. And I know that myself, that I got abused, pushed by some people during the last general election, and a lot of people actually were quite surprised. It was outside a pub after I'd done a hustings. And all I can say is a number of people were shocked by that. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Friend referred just now to the possibility of holding elections in schools. Now, I think my honourable friend may know what I'm about to say, because in his great constituency there is a school called Stonyhurst College, which I happen to attend. And I just wondered whether on any occasion that he can recall, Stonyhurst has used its premises for the purposes of elections. Is that the case or not?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't believe so. It was once used as the venue for the count, for the by-election and the subsequent general election, which was fortunately only 12 months after, because I lost the by-election, but then won the general election in 1992. But I just think that we need to look at this, because we don't want to lose any school time if we possibly can. And indeed, it's been mentioned about nativity plays. We don't want to lose nativity plays either. I know that it's been said that if we lose some nativity plays, at least it brings to an end the farce that's gone on here, and I fully appreciate that. But we don't want to inflict any sorrow on children who've been practising and rehearsing for their nativity plays, and hopefully, if it is on the 12th rather than the 9th, it will give schools the opportunity to plan ahead, to make sure that rooms are used which will not conflict with any nativity plays that are taking place. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will conclude on this just to say that whenever the election is, the 9th or the 12th, people listening to this ought to take the opportunities now to ensure that they have got postal votes, irrespective of when the date is. Make sure they've got proxy votes. I've already bumped into a number of people who've told me that they're going trekking in the Himalayas and they're going to be away 5 weeks. Well, I mean, you know, people are going on cruises and all that sort of stuff. And so, therefore, I do hope that people take the precautions now. The most important thing for people at a general election is not losing their vote. It's to be able to participate in helping to vote for what is going to be the next government of this country. And I do hope that whether it's the 9th or the 12th, that people vote Conservative and ensure that we deliver the Brexit that they voted for at the referendum.
Yeah.
Sir Desmond Swing.
I don't know, Madam Deputy Speaker, if it's just my easygoing charm, but my experience in Pontypridd, West Bromwich and the New Forest is that the worst I've ever heard is, "Sorry, mate, I'm Labour." I do hope that the Hansard reporters will not feel the necessity to record some of the words that we have heard this evening verbatim. I'd like the Minister, when he comes to reply to the debate, to comment on the implications of the difference in 3 days between the two dates that stand before us, in respect of how they will impact on the date for nominations, and whether those days will fall either side of the publication of the new register, because when you fill out the nomination form you have to record the electoral numbers, which undoubtedly will have changed after the 1st of December. And I just wonder if that's going to present a problem, and if he could draw that to our attention if it does. I'd like to move on to the question of students, which has been raised. Oh, of course.
I think he does raise quite an important point here, that there is an essential democratic process that needs to be conducted before a general election, which is the selection of candidates. And there are quite a large number of constituencies where I suspect the political parties have not yet selected candidates, and in order that the members of local associations have time in order to go through that process and avoid having candidates imposed from the centre, they do need these extra few days.
Well, if I may say, we have had two divisions in recent weeks on the question of whether there should be an election, so I would have thought those associations ought properly to have attended to the question of getting on with selecting candidates. I'm sorry to hear that they haven't, but I don't think there's much that we can do about that. But certainly the additional days would be of some assistance.
Well, I think what my right honourable friend ought to understand is that, of course, central parties have a role in overseeing these selections in constituency associations, and so there has been a certain timetable applied to associations all anxious to select their candidates, where the associations have not been able to. I know that because of my engagement with East Surrey, who are not keen to have a selection shortlist of the kind that they had in 2010.
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that the independent members of my association, the New Forest, wouldn't tolerate anyone imposing a candidate or superintending the process over them, and I would hope that other constituencies would follow a similar line. So if I may come to the question of students, we've heard that overwhelmingly students choose to vote at home, and we've heard that postal and proxy votes are available, and we've heard that 40 of the top universities will still be sitting on the 12th. Now, I believe that my honourable friend, the member for Ribble Valley, was quite mistaken in an earlier intervention that he made on my honourable friend, the member for Mid-Dorset. He implied that students could only be registered at one address. That is not the case. Students are entirely entitled to register at both addresses. Of course, it's important that they only vote at one of them. But when I was myself chairman of the St Andrews University Conservative Association, and our former friend Alex Salmon will remember these events well, I saw it as my duty to ensure that all members of the Conservative Association were registered at both addresses, so that, given an election, we would be able to inform them as to where their vote would count for more. And therefore, I undertook that task. Unfortunately, on the evening of the referendum, I think in 1979, I was visited by members of Special Branch and found myself charged with 53 offences against the False Oaths Act Scotland 1933. Madam Speaker, I got off, I would say, but nevertheless, it was certainly a very frightening experience. But certainly in those days, universities and university political associations went to great lengths to ensure that all their members were registered in both addresses, so if that has continued, it shouldn't be a problem. May I conclude by saying that, having heard the speech by the Honourable Lady, the member for Birmingham Yardley, that very impressive speech during the second reading debate, I can assure my honourable friends that I would not be voting for this bill with any great enthusiasm if she were the leader of the party opposite.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The clause stand part provisions raise very important questions of principle, which we have to look at very carefully indeed, because it all goes to the question of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act itself. And in the second reading, I made the point very clearly that for those who are interested in looking at the manner in which that disgraceful act was put through, because I was very, very strongly against it. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I found myself, out of all the members of Parliament, I went through the division lists earlier on, and I see my right honourable friend, the member for New Forest, sitting there. I think he was the PPS to the Prime Minister at the time, and I incurred the wrath of the Prime Minister by my absolute determination to do everything possible to ruin the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And in fact, I'm afraid to say that we only managed to muster 10 members of Parliament, and not always that. In fact, on one occasion, I found myself actually just with one other person, my right honourable friend, then the Member of Parliament for Aldridge Brownhill, Sir Richard Shepherd, and he and I ended up as the only ones who voted on that. And that's why I'm specifically thinking in terms of the manner in which this very important bill is being brought through, because it was a particular amendment which I took the gravest interest in, during the course of that bill when it was going through. And I can only say this, that we're now actually dealing with a bill to make provision for a parliamentary general election to be held on the 9th as compared to the 12th, which is in the bill itself. And it has already been ruled that clause stand part is an integral part of these proceedings, and I have every intention of making the points that I want to make on that point, having had the ruling as I did from the previous incumbent in the chair. Now, in particular, therefore, I might refer to a publication which is called Public Whip. Now, the Public Whip is a very important publication, and I noticed today, when I got the information from the library, that it said that I, as the Member of Parliament for Stone, was very strongly against the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And I can tell you why, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very simple. It is the fact that, as I said earlier, it gave an undemocratic power to the whips. It created the shenanigans of upsetting the rule regarding the simple majorities for general elections. And that's why we're in the mess we are now. I certainly give way to my right honourable friend.
Grateful, my right honourable friend. I was in government at the time and obviously, therefore, was bound to support the proposal. But I do recall that one of the discussions that took place was that this should have been a sunset clause, so that its short purpose, which was to do with sustaining a government at the time, should have then gone away and we should have returned to the other method. And I did make the point, and it was never quite taken, and I'm sure he has made this, that in reality, when you fiddle with the Constitution without proper checks and balances, you'll almost invariably buy very heavy consequences.
Indeed, it's when sunset comes to an end that Dracula comes out of his crypt. I have to say to my right honourable friend, I'm not referring to him, of course. What I am saying, however, is that the consequences of what this Fixed Term Parliament Act has done have been abominable with regard to the proceedings in this House. But I'm more than happy to give way to my right honourable friend, Member for...
May I first of all congratulate him on the perspicacity he showed on the occasion of the passage of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, as he has done on so many other occasions. But he might recall that the then leader of the Liberal Democrats advocated the Fixed Term Parliaments Act on the basis that it would give much greater political stability to our system in future years. And I wonder if he agrees that that was about as accurate a prediction on that occasion as all other Liberal Democrat predictions.
And of course it was cobbled together for the very simple reason that they wanted to keep in with the Liberal Democrats. That's the real purpose of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, and of course that was one of the most pernicious aspects of the coalition. And I have to say that in a book which was written by Matthew D'Ancona, which was brought to my attention a few months ago, I understand that as part of this coalition deal, which by the way also included getting rid of the 1922 committee, because it was intended that we would have ministers in that 22 committee, and I fired what could be described as an almighty exocet. I guaranteed that they were not going to be allowed to vote, with the advice that we received from a very eminent QC, whom I instructed pro bono, because they wanted to bring the ministers into that 1922 committee to destroy the 1922 committee itself. But in addition to that, I just mentioned that in this book written by Matthew D'Ancona, I found to my astonishment but great interest that apparently the then Prime Minister, in a conclave with his closest advisers, said that I have a choice to make. And the question was, what was that choice about the coalition and about how he was going to conduct his prime ministership, which was before the coalition began. And he said, I have a choice to make. Am I going to go into a coalition with Nick Clegg or Bill Cash? Which I found most interesting. And I can only say that I think, if I may say so, that is why this particular provision is highly relevant, this clause stand part. Because here we've got this extraordinary situation in which the whole issue of the early parliamentary election, the general election, actually is, largely speaking, the product, all the shenanigans on the other side, all the shenanigans that we've had from our own colleagues in the House of Commons, some of whom lost the whip and all the rest of it, is precisely because this business of having a general election, which otherwise, but for this bill, would not have been put through, and which will be put through tonight, I strongly believe, is connected with the very issue of the reason why they wanted the coalition back in 2010, which was to stop people like me banging on about Europe, as I remember the Prime Minister saying, and they hadn't got a chance. That's the point that has to be made. So really what I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the vote, of course I will.
Making the most excellent points about the drawback of the Fixed Term Parliament Act and that he was opposed to it. Don't you think there is a salutary lesson here that this place should not legislate in haste at any time? And would he share my concerns at the rapidity and danger of the Ben Surrender Act, which will stain this House for many years to come, and its effects are being seen today and will be with us for a very, very long time?
That, if I may say, is absolutely right. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the centuries, parliaments have acquired their own names. For example, there was the Barebones Parliament. Then there was the Rump Parliament. Then there was the Addle Parliament. And there has been the Mad Parliament. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say that this Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, ought to be called what it has now become, the Purgatory Parliament. So I say to the House, this is the shenanigans from the opposition, the shenanigans from those who've been determined to remain in the European Union at any price. The times I have had to upbraid them. I remember saying on one occasion, I've heard of rats trying to leave a sinking ship, but I've never heard of rats trying to sink a leaving ship. And that remains something which is on the record from some months ago. And I say that again for this reason, that I believe very, very strongly that it is unconscionable that we should not have this general election. We need it because, above all else, we had the referendum, which itself was put into effect by virtue of this House, by 6-1, deciding that it would have a referendum. It was in the manifestos. It was in the members on the other side of the House, and some of them did and a few did not, by 499 to 126, voted for the notification of Withdrawal Act. And every single Conservative Member of Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, everyone, even the member for Rushcliffe, voted for the Withdrawal Act 2018, which received royal assent on the 26th of June. Yes, he did indeed. On the 26th of June 2018. I'll certainly give way.
My honourable friend, he talks about rats and he quoted it. And I'd just like to tell him that the exact quotation, if I recall it correctly, is that there are many examples in history of rats leaving a sinking ship, but only one of mice joining one.
Well, I must say I find that very amusing, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for saying that. I can only say this, that the question of the name that this Parliament has now acquired and deserved, the Purgatory Parliament, I believe is appropriate and right in the circumstances. And I would say this to the House, and I would say this as I did some weeks ago on another occasion, in the name of God go, I believe that this is the moment for this Parliament to depart, in the words of Oliver Cromwell all those years ago. And we've had the Speaker quite frequently referring to 17th century precedents. So I say again, in the name of God go to this Parliament. Let us get on with the general election and let us get Brexit done.
Mr. Steve Baker.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I turn first to Amendment 14? which has the effect of aligning the registration deadline for Scotland with the registration deadline in the rest of the United Kingdom by removing the need for the St Andrew's Day bank holiday in Scotland to be taken into account. And I congratulate the Minister on his wisdom in bringing forward this very sensible amendment. But I wonder if the Minister, when he does make a few remarks, whether he could just confirm that Scotland is being treated fairly in this amendment, because on these benches we are most concerned to ensure the fair treatment of Scotland. We're very proud that Scotland is in the United Kingdom, and we are determined, of course, to ensure the fair treatment of people throughout the great country of Scotland. And I knew one of them, Madam Deputy Speaker, wouldn't resist it, and I'm grateful to you.
If the government had thought this through, it would have been provided for in the original bill. It may well be that it was gently pointed out to them from sources other than their own benches.
I'm extremely grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think what the honourable gentleman has just proven to me, contrary to the remarks we hear so often from those particular benches, that sometimes the British government listens to the voice of Scotland, respects the voice of Scotland, and acts on the voice of Scotland. And I'm very, very proud of my own Treasury bench for doing just that, and I'm grateful to the Minister. Perhaps he might turn that moment. Would you like to?
I'm very grateful for him giving it. Just to make the point, he talks about the voice of Scotland. It is listened to, but remember, the SNP are not Scotland. They may sell them as such, but they are not Scotland.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend, and he reminds me that he is one of the most powerful champions of the voice of Scotland. But I think, whilst I wish to pay tribute to him for a little longer, I should just move on to Amendments 2 and 3, which of course seek to change the date. Why anyone would wish to move the date from the traditional day of a Thursday to a Monday, I can't imagine. I am rather concerned that it's over some perception of advantage to holding the poll on a Monday, which obviously wouldn't be appropriate. And I hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll forgive me if I dilate just a little to perhaps just to comment on some of the other amendments, because I did receive some constituency correspondence today asking me to back Amendment 1 relating to citizens of the European Union. And I have to say that whatever our love for the citizens of the European Union who are in the UK, however willing we all are, however delighted we are to embrace their work and welcome them to stay in the UK, it would be quite wrong to expand the franchise.
I understand why the honourable gentleman is taking this opportunity to speak to Amendment 1, but as Amendment 1 has not been selected, then it is out of order for the honourable gentleman to speak to Amendment 1. However, if he were to address his remarks in the context of Amendment 2 or Amendment 3, then he would be in order. Mr. Baker.
Deputy Speaker, and I would just say that in the context of Amendments 2 or 3, any attempt to gerrymander the poll to try and produce a particular result would be quite wrong, quite outrageous. And I think that some of the amendments which were tabled, which went beyond Amendments 2 and 3, were quite blatant attempts to produce a particular result, that they were quite wrong, and I'm certainly very grateful that we have not had them placed before the House for any division. I will just finish. I'll give way before I finish.
To my friend for giving way. If the marvellous Laura Kuenssberg is to be believed, and I'm sure she is my honourable friend aware that Britain would have been the only country in the European Union to actually allow non-nationals to vote in a general election?
I think that my honourable friend is right, and indeed the wonderful Laura Kuenssberg is also right, and what is sauce for the goose is indeed sauce for the gander, as I think our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said. Oh, I will give way just once more before concluding.
I'm very grateful for the honourable member, but I should point out to him that EU nationals are given the vote in Scottish elections, and they voted in the 2014 referendum. Well, I can hear Conservatives shouting national, but I hate to point out to them, Scotland is a nation.
I think on these benches we're quite comfortable with the notion that Scotland is a nation, but the United Kingdom is the basis for the electorate for this House, and it's quite right that the franchise should therefore be citizens or perhaps subjects of the United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do feel that I should now draw my opening remarks to a conclusion. And so I'll just simply say on a serious note that this bill, of course, has to go through the other place. And I think if the other place were to put in amendments to this simple and straightforward bill, sought to produce a particular outcome, I think we would have to say they had no right whatever to do that, that it would be quite unconstitutional, and I think that they would be playing with fire, and indeed they would be playing with their own futures in that House, were they to seek to amend this bill to produce a particular outcome.
It's okay, I'll just put the question. Thank you. Perfect timing. The question is that amendment to be made. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that amendment to be made. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellus for the ayes, Chris Elmore and Tangham Debonair. Tellus for the noes, Ian Stewart and Stuart Andrew. your doors.
The ayes to the right, 295. The noes to the left, 315.
Order. The ayes to the right, 295. The noes to the left, 315. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlocked. We now come to the question is that Amendment 14 to Clause 1 be made. Call the Minister to move Government Amendment 14. The question is that Amendment 14 to Clause 1 be made. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 1 and Clause 2 stand part. It hasn't been amended. The question is that Clause 1 as amended and Clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call Amendment 3 being consequential upon the passing of Amendment 2 cannot now be moved. Order. Order. Today, I must now put forthwith the question on third reading. Minister to move formally. Point of order, Mr. Leslie.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was hoping to move the manuscript amendment at the report stage of the bill, that the bill has been amended, and if the bill has been amended, it should be reported to the House, and therefore I would like to move the manuscript amendment standing in my name.
Here. I couldn't hear the honourable gentleman very well, but is the honourable gentleman suggesting that he would like to retable or to put in some other way amendments which he had previously tabled and which were not selected for discussion and vote earlier in the day?
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, now that the bill has exited committee stage, the bill is to be reported to the House, and I have tabled an amendment at report stage, and I should beg to move that that manuscript amendment be now moved.
I am now aware, now that the honourable gentleman has raised the point, that the honourable gentleman has tabled an amendment, and I now have his amendment before me, and I am reading his amendment, and it appears to me and because the knife has fallen, are not suitable for discussion at this time. So, the question is that the bill be now read a third time. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. I'm going to let Mr. Speaker come in and finish this. not that I don't know what to do.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes. Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes. I'll do it alphabetically. Ben Lake and Chris Leslie.
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20.
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Colleagues, we come now to the intended business statement by the Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg. I beg the right honourable gentleman's pardon. The honourable lady had signalled a desire, if the right honourable gentleman will forgive me, to raise a point of order, which she can do briefly. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
Today's vote lays down precedent which overrides the Fixed Term Parliament Act, thus overriding one of Parliament's checks and balances against excessive executive power. Could he advise, please, how to protect democracy in this place from further such government by fiat?
Well, we are in unusual times, and there have been many examples to evidence that over the last few months. Very specifically, what I say to the Honourable Lady is that the will of the House determines what happens in these matters, subject to the overriding principle of adherence to a clear rule. The Honourable Lady strongly objects to what has happened, but nothing that has happened today has been in any way disorderly. A bill has been introduced, there has been a second reading, there has been a committee stage, and there was a business of the House motion in amended form accepted by the House. She has registered her discontent, which I was very happy for her to do, but beyond that, the matter cannot be taken further tonight. And point of order, Anna Soubry.
I know it's uncomfortable sometimes to speak truth to power. But, Mr. Speaker, would it be in order to record that in private, many of us have come to the conclusion that the majority of backbenchers on both sides do not want a general election? And would it be because as the Honourable Lady has said, fear from whatever quarter it may come will be an abiding thing that will come out, and history will record that, of this Parliament. And a lack of courage from too many is also a mark at the end of this Parliament. Would it also be in order to record, Mr. Speaker, that in private again, from the conversations that take place, as you understand, it is undoubtedly a fact that the majority of members of this Parliament support a people's vote rather than a general election?
I'm grateful to the... I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, who always speaks her mind, and I respect that. I know, however, she will accept that that was by way of being a case of the Right Honourable Lady wanting to tell me and the House what she thought, rather than having any particular interest in me telling her what I think. But I will tell her what I think, and what I think is that we don't work in this place on the basis of what people may or may not say to each other in private. We work on the basis of the decisions that are made by the House. And the House has made a decision in a perfectly orderly way. She has registered her objection to it, and we will have to leave it there. And I hope, and I sense that there's an appetite for this, we can now proceed with the statement on business. Well, I very gently say to the honourable gentleman that he's quite... to the honourable lady... I do beg your pardon. I very gently say to the honourable lady that it is quite important to have antennae attuned to the will of the House. So if she's going to do it, it better be one sentence. Point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For 3.5 years, the Liberal Democrats have campaigned for the people of this country to have the final say. We would have preferred that to be a people's vote, and we would have preferred now to have voted on December the 9th. But Parliament having decided We are ready to take this issue back and give the people the chance to say whether, in fact, Brexit is something they want to stop.
The Honourable somebody said from a sedentary position that it wasn't a point of order. That doesn't distinguish it, I must say, for the benefit of members of the public, from the overwhelming majority of what I will call purported points of order, which are in fact not points of order. The Honourable Lady has made her point. We must now proceed with the business statement by the Leader of the House of Commons, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the decision of the House to pass the early Parliamentary General Election Bill, I should like to make a short statement regarding the business for tomorrow. The business for tomorrow will be a general debate on the report from the Grenfell Tower inquiry led by the Prime Minister, followed by a business of the House motion and all stages of the Northern Ireland Budget Bill. You'll all be very glad to know I shall make a further business statement to the House tomorrow regarding the business for the rest of the week.
Thank you. The Shadow Leader of the House, Valerie Vaz.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Leader of the House? And we shouldn't keep meeting like this. But, Mr. Speaker, the business is agreed by the opposition.
Very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady.
Mr. Pete Wishart, can I just appeal to members who are leaving the chamber, say aye, playing for time, to do so quickly and quietly so that the remaining members of the House can attend to what the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Perth and North Perthshire, wishes to say on the matter of this relatively narrow business statement. If people are about to beetle out of the House, walking past the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Perth and North Perthshire, I hope that they will do so quickly so that he is not interrupted as he orates in his inimitable fashion to the House. Mr. Pete Wishart.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and it won't be a point for oration, perhaps when you get down to the business that the House has announced. And can I join the Shadow Leader? We are going to have to stop meeting like this at these impromptu business statements. I think we'll all miss them and his genuine individual style as he announces one emergency business statement after another emergency business statement. And we look forward to the next enthralling episode tomorrow when we will all be congregated again and the three of us can obviously enjoy the get-together that we've been experiencing in the course of the past few days. We have no problem or objection to the businesses announced. We look forward to the debate on Grenfell, and we look forward again to the continuing get-togethers as has become a regular feature of our time in the House. And just to finally say, Mr. Speaker, we are very pleased that this bill has been passed this evening, and I think it's worth saying that the whole House, he would have had his two-thirds majority if he'd looked at the last result, and I see him laughing and grinning away there after him trying to secure that in the course of the past days. But we're looking forward to this election. We're looking forward to coming back in increased numbers and ensuring that we will oppose their hard Tory Brexit, and we will continue to fight for Scotland's right to choose Scotland's future.
Mr. Speaker, can I just say what a pleasure it is to see the Honourable Gentleman's good nature shine through in a question which he normally keeps so carefully hidden on the floor of the House but is always so apparent in private.
Mr. Barry Sherman.
Can I ask the Leader of the House, does he share with me, but perhaps he doesn't? It's one of these days when I want to go home and watch Laura Kunsberg to tell me what the hell's going on in this place. But there is a feel today that his statement isn't very full. He doesn't mention what's happening in the election of the new Speaker. He had said nothing about whether there will be a Prime Minister's questions this week. Could you fill us in a little bit more detail about what the hell is going on?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All the routine question times will continue to take place in the normal way whilst this Parliament is in existence. Parliament has to be dissolved in accordance with the bill if it completes its passage in the House of Lords at, I believe, midnight 01 on Wednesday. This date is set as 25 days backwards from the date of the general election, working days, with an exemption to cover the bank holiday in Scotland for St Andrew's Day. I accept that I am not giving further business, but this is fairly normal at the end of a Parliament when we will have to look at what items need to be washed up and dealt with, and therefore I can absolutely assure the House that I will come back with further statements as necessary.
Thank you. Mr Kevin Brennan.
Does the Leader of the House anticipate that the House will be meeting at all next week? And does he anticipate that we'll be electing a new Speaker before the House dissolves?
The issue there will depend on the progress of business and the date of prorogation. We will have to see how rapidly business progresses, but the dissolution date is Wednesday, so it is perfectly possible for the House to be sitting on Monday and Tuesday of next week.
Mike Gapes.
Speaker, can the Leader of the House ensure that all staff employed by members of this House are given urgent advice about what might be necessary for them, particularly in the cases where their members may either be retiring or might not be re-elected?
This is an extraordinarily important point, and I am aware that when talk of an early general election first started in September, the House authorities started working on updating the information that is available to staff and to members, both returning members potentially and retiring members, to ensure that they and their staff are fully informed of what happens, what the conditions are, what the provisions are. But I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising that point, and I know that the House authorities will also have heard, and that if this information hasn't already been distributed, it will be distributed as a matter of urgency.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to follow up the point being made by my honourable friend for Ilford South, I actually had an amendment that wasn't selected today for the bill that said that any member of staff who works for a current member and continuously has done so for a period of time should be considered for additional redundancy payments, given that if the member was to lose, they will only get a month and they will lose their job on the 12th of December. And I wonder if I could just maybe ask the Leader of the House if he would look at that with IPSA and the authorities to ensure that the staff of members who leave or lose are not disadvantaged over that Christmas and New Year period.
Well, that's an important point. We are all very grateful, I think, to the staff that we have supporting us both as constituency MPs and who work for the House authorities, that this House is extraordinarily well served by people who are dedicated above and beyond the requirements of duty. And those of us who, as constituency MPs, deal with a busy postbag often find that our staff have dealt with problems for our constituents before they've even brought them to our attention. And so we are very, very lucky with the staff that we have, and I'm always keen that they should be treated as well as possible. I will certainly undertake to make representations on the honourable gentleman's behalf to IPSA. It is always difficult finding a fair balance when taxpayers' money is being used, but my sympathies are very much with staff and in favour of looking after them well.
Mr Speaker, I wonder if the Leader of the House could clarify whether the election of a new Speaker is going to take place next week. Obviously, many members will have a view as to where they wish to be if that election is taking place.
Mr Speaker, unfortunately I have nothing to add to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Dr Lisa Cameron.
Mr Speaker, will the Leader of the House ensure that there is robust guidance for parliamentary security and security forces across the United Kingdom, particularly given the outcome of Lord Abu's report into intimidation and bullying in terms of public life, that all candidates can stand from all backgrounds without fear of abuse in this next general election?
Mr Speaker, this is a point of fundamental importance to our democracy. I actually had a meeting earlier today with the head of security in the House of Commons and with a representative of the Metropolitan Police, and we discussed a number of security matters relating to members, but it's obviously important that candidates feel safe as well, and I'm sure the Home Office will send out guidelines to returning officers. But it is so important that, as the Honourable Lady says, people from all backgrounds feel safe standing for Parliament. And we are in a tense period. I think everybody recognises that, and the temperature around the issues we are facing is higher than it has been previously, and therefore there is more cause for concern than perhaps there was in elections in 2015, 2010 and before. So I take what the Honourable Lady says very seriously, and I will bring it to the attention of both the Home Secretary and to the House authorities.
Thank you. Order. Petition. Tim Farron.
I seek to present a petition on behalf of 1,852 residents of Cumbria who oppose the proposed West Cumbrian coal mine, believing as I do that in the fight to prevent climate catastrophe, it is vital that we keep fossil fuels in the ground. The petitioners request that the Secretary of State calls in the application for his own determination at the earliest opportunity, and that he rules against the opening of the mine, and the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition West Cumbria coal mine.
Thank you. Petition. When the honourable gentleman is ready. Mr Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to submit a petition on behalf of my constituents to maintain the 19A First Bus Glasgow service and to establish a free municipal bus service. The petition reads to the House of Commons, the petition of the residents of Glasgow North East declares that the 19A local bus service between Robroyston and Glasgow city centre and operated by First Glasgow is a lifeline for local residents and allows them to frequently access vital local services in the city centre of Glasgow. The provision of public transport in this area is already poor, and this service cut and the move to an hourly motorway express service with no Sunday service would only isolate the communities in Robroyston, Provenmill, Germiston and Royston further. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons instruct that the Secretary of State for Scotland engages with First Bus and the Scottish Government to do all within his power to maintain the 19A bus service and to promote the creation of a free-to-use municipal bus service across the entire city of Glasgow. And the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition 19A First Bus Glasgow service.
Thank you. Order. Bless you. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I just say on a personal note, as you leave the chair, it has been a pleasure to serve briefly under you in this debate, but I welcome the Deputy Speaker to his place. The issue I want to raise this evening is, and I should perhaps just clarify, because the enunciators earlier today had the topic wrong. They were actually describing it or listing it as mineral mining in Bradford. So I hope that the Minister has been duly informed that it's actually mining in Barford in my constituency. So I don't want to disappoint anyone, but that's exactly what I'll be speaking on. This is not a parochial issue. It is an issue of principle. And it relates to a village, Barford, 1,500 people, in the constituency of Warwick and Leamington, my constituency. And of course, it'd be very easy to just consider that this is a one-off debate, a one-off issue, that it may be parochial to that particular village. But as I said, it is about principle. With Brexit, and of course much of today, as yesterday and last week and the months before, has been discussed. And I'm sure many people would like a break from that. But, you know, this issue that I'm about to elaborate on relates to environmental standards as much as it does anything else. And this is where many of us on these benches have been speaking out about how we wish to defend how important it is to us to ensure that environmental protections are maintained at the highest level, that we have dynamic alignment with European regulations. So the proposals for this quarry site are in a little village, or little hamlet, called Wasperton, just adjacent to the village of Barford. And it's been identified by Warwickshire County Council as part of its minerals plan. And the purpose of the site is for the mining, the excavation of sand and gravel. And for over a year, I've been supporting the community in their campaign, because the site is huge. It almost dwarfs the village. The area is an approximately level area of 85 hectares of arable farmland, part of which, approximately 50% of which, is high-grade agricultural land, what is termed BMV, i.e. best and most versatile. Now, the land is currently owned by St John's College, and the proposed quarry site would lie just 350 metres from the edge of the village of Barford. And the location is important here, because in identifying sites across the county of Warwickshire, Site 4, as it's known, near Barford, is the only one with a large village and a school nearby. And under the current plan, work at the quarry, as I say, would take place just 350 metres from the southern edge of the village. Now, the proposals are due to be submitted for consideration to the Planning Inspectorate in a few weeks' time. And we'll expect to report an outcome of deliberations in the spring of 2020, and possibly for the plan to be scheduled for adoption in December 2020. Now, I do recognise there is a need for such minerals. For all authorities up and down the land, there is this challenge of where do we find sand and gravels that we need for our construction industry. And in its plan, Warwickshire County Council states the following: the main issue for this plan is to address the shortfall in sand and gravel. Without adequate sand and gravel, there will not be enough aggregate to serve the construction industry in the county and the sub-region. Now, the premise for this is, of course, a calculation based on need, and those assumptions that are the basis of that calculation. And I would suggest that fundamental to this is how it has been arrived at. And indeed, the construction industry, the construction of housing, has already been identified to be overstated. The local 5-year housing supply identified 17,000 homes for construction in Warwick District. Yet the revised Office of National Statistics forecasts a need for half that figure. And I think there are other parts of the country where this overstatement is reflected, perhaps elsewhere, but maybe not to the same scale. Now, this is a critical part of the point I want to make, the argument. But there are other issues that I want to address as well. There is the matter of access to the site. As the Council's plan states, generally, mineral extraction sites are not approved if they require lorries to travel through minor roads and centres of population, including both towns and villages. Any site submissions with predicted transport or highway problems will be rejected unless it can be demonstrated that the issues can be satisfactorily mitigated. Now, interestingly, at the first public consultation stage of the plan, there were 8 allocations that were required to deliver 8 million tonnes. But following a further decline in sales, this plan required only 6.5 million tonnes, which could be delivered through 6 allocations. Now, the sites are spread geographically across Warwickshire, but 2 sites had been withdrawn, one much further to the south, nearer Stratford-upon-Avon, and another more immediately south of this proposed site. Now, it's claimed by the Council that this site, Wasperton, should serve Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwick and Leamington in terms of its development needs. But I am not convinced, and nor is the public. The issues are best summarised by the following points. Firstly, an excess to the actual need, as I've already identified, the oversupply of houses, according to the Office for National Statistics. Secondly, the site's proximity to the village, the 350 metres that I've already alluded to. And thirdly, the site's proximity to the village school. And it should be noted that the site is to the south of the village, directly south, so threatened by dust and silicates from this sand that would be excavated, those silicates blown over by prevailing winds. But let me start with the fundamental question of whether it is actually needed. Perhaps most concerning, based on those calculations that I just described, but also is the role really of the landowner, St John's College, Oxford. And I wrote to the President myself in the late spring. I have to say I was not particularly pleased by the response I got from the President of the college, because, you know, this college is the wealthiest college in Oxford. It does not need the money. So why has it put forward this site when it is going to be so harmful to the lives of all the residents and the children of Barford and Wasperton? And you know, the claim, a disingenuous claim, I believe, that it was making the land available for housing development. Well, it was not. This land will be opened up, it will be dug up, and despite being high-grade agricultural land, it will become an eyesore, open to the extraction of sand and gravel. And you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, even the student body of St John's College passed a motion to stand against the project. There is widespread concern and dismay that a college with the wealth of St John's should be allowing this to happen. They do not need to be conceding to sell this land to allow this excavation, this mining. And you know, the National Planning Policy Framework, Mr. Deputy Speaker, states that MPAs should make provision for a sand and gravel land bank for at least 7 years of permitted reserves. But as I've already said, there is sufficient land bank. It currently stands at 8 years, but the numbers in the calculation of how many houses are required does not suggest it is needed at all. So why do we need this material? Not just the quantity of housing, as I've said, but the materials that are used themselves. The assumption is that we will continue to use sand and gravel in the same quantities as in the past. But this is not sustainable development. It's not sustainable on our environment, because sand and gravel in construction use so much energy, whether it be in the forging of bricks or other materials such as concretes and so on. And I stated there are other concerns about the proximity, the concerns that the villagers, the community have themselves. And this is essentially about the dust emissions and the impact on residents' own health and the children's health. Whilst the County Council have proposed measures to reduce dust, these will not prevent the prevailing winds carrying dust over the village, and the proposals do not offer any guarantee that the quarry will not have negative health impacts. The dust from the quarry will contain silica, which can be extremely harmful to the elderly and young children. As I said, with the primary school of St Peter's so close by, the 170 students there will be put at particular risk. And at this point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to just remark on the fantastic campaigning work being done by the school. They see the risks, they recognise the threats, and they are determined to ensure this quarry is never realised. But just related to the point about the toxicity of the air, there's an organisation called the Environmental Working Group. It's a US-based body specialising in research and advocacy, who quote, "None of the air quality standards for silica are adequate to protect people living or working near sand mining sites. The danger of airborne silica is especially acute for children. Silica air pollution has become a danger for residents near open sand mining and processing. Children, older adults and others with existing disease are especially at risk. We think when we talk about silicates and these very fine materials, we often think about PM10s, PM2.5s, and the Minister and I have exchanged in other debates just about the threats of these particles to human health. And I believe the Minister shares with me a real concern about the sort of environment, the air quality that we should have, and particularly for young people. But that point about these particulates, we're reminded of with, say, asbestos, about those microfibers and how damaging they are to our lungs, and particularly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to developing young lungs and other organs. And these should not be allowed to enter into the atmosphere, certainly within a couple of 100 metres of a primary school. Now, the organisation, the Environmental Working Group, have concerns for residents living within 1,500 metres of any excavation site because of this dissipation of dust particles. And the evidence that they have produced shows that silica levels measured near open sand mining in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and there's no difference between those sites in that part of the world to here in the UK. But they identified that those silica levels were at least 10 times higher than the 3 micrograms per cubic metre, which is the recommended limit. Let me just turn now to the infrastructure and its unsuitability. The inadequacy of local highways, which cannot accommodate the development and the resulting air pollution caused by 60 heavy goods vehicles accessing the site each day. There are also the wider environmental issues, the irreparable damage to the high-grade farmland, including versatile land, the 400-year-old hedgerows and trees, and the 3 Grade 2 listed properties that will be impacted by it. The closest of those is just 100 metres from the quarry itself. And maybe I could just identify one of the agribusinesses, one of the fine farms on this super high-grade farmland that produces top-quality salad ingredients. They have 2 crops a year, and we have to protect these sorts of farm producers because we think that the alternative is often the case to have them air freighted in from other countries. But here we can produce them locally, and this should be encouraged and protected. And if I may just add one other point, and that's the social issue, where we have long-term farming tenants who will also be displaced as a result of any quarry. Now, the government and this minister should be aware that there have been over 750 written letters of objection and a further 300 objections registered online, all opposing Warwickshire County Council's plans. And let me just put that in perspective. There are only 1,500 villages. Their campaign, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has been relentless. And as I say, I commend them for the work that they've been doing. And I have tried and been determined myself to support and stand by them throughout. I've written to DEFRA, to the Secretary of State. I wrote to the Secretary of State, the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government to raise planning concerns about this. And I've also met with the County Council and with many residents in the village of Barford itself. And as I mentioned earlier, I wrote to St John's College itself. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if I may, in summary, just restate that the housing numbers on which this plan is predicated are wrong. They have been overstated. The Office for National Statistics has said that they are significantly higher than what is actually required. And as I said just a moment ago, we are assuming that we're going to be using sands and gravels in the same quantities as we ever did to construct housing and buildings in the same way that we have always done. but there is a revolution in the way housing is being made and being built. So it is wrong to make that assumption. I then mentioned about the proximity of the site to the village. The fact that the site, the quarry site proposed, is just 350 metres from the village and a little bit further from the school. And this issue, this huge issue of air toxicity needs to be addressed. You know, in other countries, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is a minimum exclusion zone. And this is legally established. For example, in Canada, their regulations, I think, state a minimum of 600 metres. And why are we not adopting this? These are the sorts of standards we should be including in the Environment Bill, but also in how we consider in our environmental practices should we be leaving the EU. But the community is clear in its demands. They want to see the government to legislate to restrict the mining of mineral materials that release silica dust to sites that are a safe distance from residential areas, and they would like to see a minimum of 1,000 metres. This is not difficult. This should be the sort of legislation that the government is capable of introducing. As I said, this is the only site in the Warwickshire Plan that actually is near a large village and near a school, and that is why it should be excluded from the Warwickshire County Council Minerals Plan. And as I said, this land is high-grade farmland. We need high-grade farmland to produce the foods that we depend on. We need food resilience in this country. And finally, may I just quote, and I'm sure the Minister won't mind, from the government's own national planning policy, reminding that DEFRA have said that the National Planning Policy Framework seeks to protect the best and most versatile farmland. This is such a case, and I would ask the Minister to intervene and ensure this quarry is not allowed. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Minister Rebecca Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the honourable member for bringing this debate, and I know he does care about the environment. He actually took over from me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the all-party electric vehicle group, so we have a connection about caring for the environment and emissions and such like, and he's right to raise issues that relate to his constituency of Warwick and Leamington. And I do, however, hope that he appreciates that there is a due and proper process to be followed with the consideration of local planning, and that given the Secretary of State's quasi-judicial role in the planning system, I'm unable to comment on the detail of individual mineral local plans. I'm sure the honourable member knew that I would say that. The government is committed to ensuring the independence of the examination process for local plans, and local people must have confidence that the examination of local plans for their communities is fair and open, and that decisions are made impartially. And I do understand that Warwickshire County Council are proposing to submit the Warwickshire Minerals Plan to the Planning Inspectorate in the coming weeks, and therefore neither myself nor my right honourable and honourable friends at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, with whom I know that the honourable member has had many exchanges over this issue, are in a position to directly address the specific concerns raised by the honourable gentleman's constituents, and consideration of the Warwickshire Minerals Plan will be done in accordance with the planning system. I am, however, happy to discuss the crucially important topic of protecting our constituents, local communities and the environment from any impacts from development. National planning policy and guidance requires mineral planning authorities to plan for a steady and adequate supply of aggregates, including crushed rock, sand and gravel, by designating specific sites, designating preferred areas or designating areas of search. And designating specific sites provides more certainty about when and where development will take place. However, I do fully understand the concerns that people such as the residents of Barford have when development is proposed in their local area, particularly where those concerns include the potential development that may result in environmental impacts in their community, homes and businesses. We therefore need to be sure that we have clear and strong environmental regulation and planning controls that work for the environment, for people, for business. And the Environment Agency and local planning authorities therefore each have distinct roles with regard to pollution and planning controls to enable this to happen, as I'm sure the Honourable Member is well aware. And anyone with concerns, they must be confident that the system is designed to listen to their concerns. And that's why all the steps of our planning system are supported by a public consultation process through which stakeholders may consider the proposals and voice any concerns they may have to the local planning authority. And I do understand that over 1,000 people responded to that to the Warwickshire Minerals Local Plan consultation in 2030, as we've heard, and clearly that is a large number of people for the small area of the village. But once the local planning authority has prepared and consulted on a local plan, as Warwickshire have done, it's submitted to the Secretary of State, who will appoint an inspector to carry out an independent examination, and this process is dealt with by the Planning Inspectorate. The examination will assess whether the plan has been prepared in accordance with the legal and procedural requirements and if it is sound. And the 4 tests of soundness are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. And I will of course give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And I totally accept that process and how that normally, the kind of cogs of local government and so on, turn. But my question, I guess, is actually around the assumptions. And those of us who are quite close to the changes in the whole construction industry and the sorts of housing that we'll have in the future would be saying, will we be requiring these materials in the same quantity as we've done in the past, when modular housing and other forms of construction are coming through, and therefore the dependence and need for sand and gravels will be greatly reduced?
Thank you, and of course the member makes a really sound point, but that is all assumption and we have no data. One has to work on data, as the councils have to. They have to prepare their 5-year plan for housing allocation, as they also have to do with minerals and all of the other things. So that's why we have a system for how these things will work. Clearly they might change in the future, but that's all just supposition, if I might be so bold as to say that right now. And so that's why we have a process. And the inspector, the planning inspector, will consider the evidence provided by the local planning authority to support the plan and any representations which have been put forward by local people and other interested parties. And the proposed allocation at Barford will be considered as part of that examination, and the inspector will take into account the issues and viewpoints raised by the representations made, including those from residents in Barford regarding the allocation at Wasperton Farm. And clearly they can make all those cases about whether or not they think one needs this amount of crushed gravel right now at this specific time. But we have a process for the council deciding whether they think that is the guidance they want to abide by. And unfortunately, by its very nature, new developments, whether they be housing or whether they be mineral extraction, will have some impact on the local environment. And it's for this reason that we have clear and defined measures by which development proposals and their potential impact on residents, local communities and the environment are assessed. And the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, includes a requirement for local plans to be accompanied by a sustainability appraisal, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the sustainability appraisal plays an important part in demonstrating that the local plan actually respects the sustainability of those objectives, which is actually something I think the Honourable Member is referring to. And that all has to be taken into account. And the sustainability appraisal of the Warwickshire Minerals Plan incorporated a strategic environmental assessment, which actually included an assessment of the site at Wasperton Farm, and a habitats regulation assessment was also undertaken, which considered the potential of significant effects on habitat sites and species located within Warwickshire and the vicinity. And the proposed mineral local plan policy for the allocation at Wasperton Farm includes a number of requirements in relation to access, environmental matters and phased restoration of the site. And these considerations will all need to be taken into account if individual planning applications are made. And given that the proposed site at Wasperton Farm is actually pretty large, 85 hectares, any future planning application for quarry activities will need to be accompanied by an environmental impact assessment. And this process assesses the potential for environmental effects, including those to land, i.e. agricultural land, which was referred to, air quality, which has been referred to in particular, and this needs to be considered by the local authority against the local air quality plan and their plans for that. Dust has to be considered, which was also raised in particular, the health of local residents, noise levels, transport, the landscape, and local and long-distance views, which I understand was something particularly raised by the residents of Barford. And it would be remiss of me, though, not to highlight that also the process gives consideration to the potential positive impacts of such a development on the economy and local employment and such like. So, similarly to the local plan-making process, the environmental impact assessment process requires consultation with stakeholders, and this process will allow Warwickshire County Council to determine any planning application should one be submitted. The local planning authority will also have the power to set conditions which any approved application must adhere to, and the local planning authority can actually take action if it's deemed that any condition is being breached, Mr. Chairman. I fully appreciate that I have been unable to address the specific concerns raised by the honourable gentleman or the concerns raised by the residents of Barford, but it's absolutely right, but as their Member of Parliament, that they are being raised on their behalf. That is the right thing to do, and I would probably do the same for the residents of Taunton Deane. However, I do hope that my explanation of the planning and permitting system and the measures by which we seek to manage any potential environmental impacts have provided some reassurance. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question is, this House to now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.